Hello everyone. So I've been largely waiting for new cards to come out before I make more, or significantly more Duelyst videos. And there have actually been some new cards coming out. We got an announcement yesterday that Wave 2 of Kickstarter designed card releases was going to come out, I think tomorrow, as of this recording, possibly today. And we also got another drop of cards about 2 months ago now. Which, to be honest, I think I did one draft since then, and I didn't see any of them. So, I don't know how much impact they had, but there is another wave coming up, and I'll probably wait for that before I really dig in. But what I thought I could do, in the meantime, is a set review. Now, obviously, I haven't been playing very actively, and I haven't played Constructed in a little while, but from what I understand, it's pretty much, I mean, the meta hasn't changed much since I did last play it very actively. And, you know, we can take a pop at just analysing the cards from like a design perspective and talk about their play patterns and things. There are some interesting designs in here and some interesting stuff to comment on. So I thought I'd go through them. So this is the 0.2.10 patch from July. Again, just over 2 months ago at this point. So most people will have played with these cards more than me, but I thought I'd talk about them anyway. The first one is, let me zoom this in actually. Make it nice and big so it shows up on the screen. Here we go. The first one is Slothguard Lathorus. 4 mana, 1/6 provoke, and it makes tiles, aura tiles nearby. So this is kind of similar to the growth tiles that we used to get in Duelyst 1, I assume. The Ruby Aura gives +1/-1. The Emerald Aura makes things deal and take 1 less damage from minions, and the Sapphire Aura removes counterattacking. So each of these, I guess, just sort of messes with minion combat in interesting ways. I like this design. I don't know if this card actually does anything, especially in a... I don't really see why you would put this in a constructed deck, but I think in Gauntlet it could be just kind of interesting to, like, play around these tiles. Like, if someone plays this in the middle of the board on turn 2, it's going to mess up a lot of maths and give you some novel play experiences, and I think that's worthwhile. Of course, you do kind of get punished for playing a 1/6 that doesn't position the tiles in a way that you would want. If you've got another minion nearby, or maybe multiple minions nearby that you could potentially use immediately, that's good. I guess if you put it next to some enemy minions and hope that the Sapphire Aura lands on one of their cards and then you can attack it. But that's pretty niche. In terms of immediate impact, I think this card's going to struggle a little bit. Because it does very easily die and your opponent can capitalize. Because you've spent 4 mana on this thing, your opponent can capitalize on the tiles before you. So I don't think this card is very strong, which is a shame. Because I kind of like how it messes with the game. I guess if it was strong and you had these appearing all the time, it would get old quite quickly. So perhaps this being kind of a weaker design is for the best, I guess. Albeast Adept, 3 mana 2/4 Arcanist. When you play a spell, it gets +0/+1. When your opponent plays a spell, this gets +1/+0. This card's fine. It's a common. I think in Gauntlet, in my experience so far, spells have been reasonably easy to pick up. Like Albeast Sage can be slotted into decks without too much issue a lot of the time. Especially if you see it earlier. I think this card is totally okay just to like draft as a body, and then if you don't end up with that many spells that you can follow it up with, that's fine, you just cut it or leave it as an underwhelming thing to just play on turn 1 on going second. The fact that it relies on your opponent's playing spells to gain power, which is its main way of trading with things, does make the card kind of weak, but I like the idea that it might act as a minor deterrent from your opponent playing spells. I don't think that's going to matter most of the time, because if they are playing spells, the spells are probably going to kill things. Or, otherwise impact their game plan. If your opponent's spinning their wheels, I guess it's kind of neat. Like, if they're a combo deck and they're just trying to dig through and draw lots of cards and find stuff, your Albeast Adept can sit there and become a 5/4 and then attack, but I don't think that's a particularly common scenario in Duelyst 2. Riftwalker, 3 mana 3/2 airdrop. OG deal 2 damage to the nearest unit in front, behind, above, and below this. I think this design is very cool. This card is very efficiently costed. I think it's not going to be too difficult to have it hit 2 things, right? Because you can always, no matter where they're positioned, you can draw, up from one and across from the other, and put your Riftwalker at the nexus of the two. Because it has airdrop, you don't have to worry about positioning your stuff to play around it. So I think this card is pretty strong. I would prioritize it reasonably highly in Gauntlet, especially as it can be used to snipe off, small ranged minions and things like that. I guess the dream is if your opponent's bunched up, you can hit a bunch of stuff at once in the same way you could with a Frostbone Naga. I don't think you need to, though. I think this card is totally fine if it hits one thing. Fizzling Mystic was pretty good in Duelyst 1. Well, that is one draw, so the card advantage is more effective, but I still think this card is priced to move. Double Agent. Oh wait, I did play with this one. I really enjoyed this card actually. So it's a 2-mana 2/2, opening Gambit, draw a card from your opponent's deck, Dying Wish, shuffle this into your opponent's deck. So a 2-mana 2/2 that draws a card is fine. In Duelyst 2, it's not, your hand is going to fill up anyway, so it's not like massively what you need. But this card is funny, and it's a good story generator. Like, it's powerful enough to play, but not so powerful that there's no downside to picking it, so your opponent doesn't get, like, messed up by it, because it is only a 2/2, like, it doesn't contest the board very well. But you can kind of accept that risk in order to enjoy yourself. And I think that's nice. I like this card. I think it's a good design. I don't know if... I know in Hearthstone, back in the day, the priest cards that copy your opponent's deck used to just draw from the deck instead and take their cards away. I think in Duelyst 2 that's less of a concern than it would have been in Hearthstone, where the decks are smaller and you tend to have fewer copies of things and you need them more. In Duelyst 2, I don't think you're expecting to go through your opponent's deck necessarily. I just enjoy this card as in Gauntlet, you play it on turn 1, you get the thing, maybe you high roll and get a legendary, and that's funny. Or you get some out of faction card that then changes your game plan, which I think is also leads to interesting moments. I don't remember if your opponent can see what you drew. It's kind of a feel bad if they get blown out by a card they weren't playing around or couldn't play around from their own deck, but besides that, I think if you can see what they got, that sort of ameliorates that pretty well. Metal Tooth, 3-mana 2/2 Frenzy. This has Rush when you control another mech. So it's a mini Mercantor. Card seems quite good. When you control another mech, is like, mechs are cheap, so you can always save your Helm of Mechazor for 4 mana, play that, play this, kill a couple things. That's pretty strong. Yeah, I don't know if this card needs to exist, you know what I mean? Like, the more Mercantor Warbeasts are not necessarily, especially in the neutral slot, are not necessarily the best thing for the game. Like in factions with cheap buffs, this card is very, very strong because 3 mana or 4 mana for a rush minion with a big upside is quite a lot. Like, that's compared to Saberspine Tiger, right? It's less reliable. Sometimes costs more mana, or you have to sandbag a helm to go with it, but it's better at trading because of the AoE. So, you're playing like, you go helm this Shadow Reflection, is that the name of the +5 attack Abyssian card? That's like a huge... You blow up your opponent's entire board, hit them for 7, it's pretty strong. I haven't seen any nerfs of it or people talking about the card, so presumably it hasn't been doing that, but I think it could and should be doing that. It's similar to Elucidator Dire Frenzy, this plus a buff. Sort of a cheap, efficient, relatively flexible way of pretending to be Mercantor Warbeast. So it wouldn't surprise me if this card caught on at some point. The downside is that you have to run mechs, but I think there's like enough cheap mechs that you could just play this and like some cheap bodies. If they print another 1 or 2 mana mech that does something on its own, this card probably gets a lot better. Mana Artificer, 2 mana 2/4 Dying Wish, create a mana spring tile on this space. I really like this design. Celebrant was a very fun card to play with from Duelyst 1, but was broken. Like, Celebrant in Duelyst 2 would be even better because of 2 draw. Celebrant in Duelyst 1 had to rely on Dream Shaper, the one that drew 2 cards if you had a Golem. And, when your opponent went turn 1 Metallurgist, Celebrant, Dream Shaper, refilled their hand, made an extra mana tile, and filled the board, you were like, I have lost the game. My opponent has put more stuff in play than me, drawn cards, and they're going to play Cataclysmic Fault next turn. Artificer doesn't do any of that, but it still lets you ramp. I think the 2/4 stat line choice is interesting. Like with things like Void Hunter, the play pattern is you put it in a safe spot and then you move it into position to attack the following turn, or threaten to attack the following turn. With Mana Artificer, it doesn't trade very well, so I think there's going to be situations where you put it in range of exactly one thing that your opponent can attack it with. And if they do that, then you get the mana tile next turn. And if they don't go for it, then you have a 2/4 in a decent position. So I think it's more of a gauntlet card than a constructed card, I think. There might be... I guess you can like flash reincarnation it, but that's pointless. Because you could flash reincarnation the thing you're ramping out. I guess you could do this to ramp out a spell, but that's pretty niche. And even then, you'd still have to find a way to... You'd have to like double flash it for it to actually die. No, that's useless. But I think it's an interesting card. I guess it's good with Darkfire Sacrifice, right? Play this on turn 1, turn 2, sack it, move on to the mana tile. You can play a 6/7 drop. It's turn 2 Spectral Revenant on the play. It's pretty good, right? The other thing that's nice about it is that if you're going first, you in Gauntlet especially, you like deterministically get a mana tile pretty much. In the same way with Crystal Wisp, like if they kill the Wisp, you get a tile, and if they don't, you get a mana. And if they don't kill a Wisp, you can move on to a mana tile. And Mana Artifice is the same. Like if they have the natural selection, that's fine. It also doesn't die to Phoenix Fire and things, so like it's an extremely safe turn 1 play if you need to hit 4 mana or you're just playing Gauntlet and want to curve out. And that makes it quite a strong card. Dezark, 6 mana, 6/9. At the end of your turn, draw an additional card. I don't really know why this card exists. Like, 6 drops in Duelyst 2 are already awkward because your hand fills up and you have to spend excess cards. Dezark draws you more cards. It's so hard for this ability to matter, I think. Like, even in decks where you can empty your hand enough to reload, there are cards like Rites of the Undervault and Mind Steal that do that for you, but better. Rather than just like plonking down this big dude and drawing. Maybe there's something... If this card was cheap, was lower rarity, I could see that as like a way of doing hand reload decks on a budget. Like if this card was a rare, it would be quite a good way for newer players to like, you know, dump their hand and then refill. But it's even then, dumping your hand requires active effort in Duelyst 2. If this card was in Duelyst 1, it would be fantastic. But it is not. Yeah, interesting. I wonder if they'll ever make a card that makes your opponent discard at the end of your turn, or something like that. Like, I can't see them doing it, but they keep cards like Spelljammer and this sort of play in that space, but the way they're actually designed makes them useless. Like Spelljammer is so bad because your opponent, you deny yourself a draw before your opponent, and then they can just kill it. Dezark more than likely won't ever draw you a card in practice, and if you put in loads of effort, maybe you'll get a couple out of it if it doesn't die, which like they still have to remove it because it's big. I think this card is like just worse Storm Metal Golem. But I'd be interested to see if there is a deck that can make use of it that wants this over the other draw spells in the game. I think that's it for this particular patch. Oh, apparently I have Slothgod Lethros. We'll see. I like the skins, by the way. I haven't commented on these before, but a lot of the card cosmetics they've released are genuinely really nice. Like, fair play. You know, they feel quite thoughtful compared to a lot of card recolorings in games like this. They do genuinely look nice. it's kind of cool that they've been done with. I presume these are community members or Kickstarter backers. Yeah. I played against somebody who had a bunch of them in one of my videos, and they were cool actually. They added something to the game, so fair play. Right, wave 2. So there was a balance patch in between the two where they changed a bunch of cards, which I might just scroll through quickly actually, because a lot of these cards have felt like they needed something in either direction when I've played with them. I do like a lot of these changes. So Sunriser is now a 4/4. This one I can zoom out a little bit. Instead of a 3/5. Which is weird because there's not a lot of efficient enablement for Sunriser in this game, but because of Sundrop Elixir existing and the fact that it's 2-draw, you can in practice trigger it on the cheap a lot of the time. Or just jam your deck full of Healing Mystics. It being a 3/5 was pretty good for just having, like, you can play it relatively safely a lot of the time, especially in Gauntlet. It was quite good. Like, this is a big nerf for Gauntlet, which is kind of a shame because I did like the card, but I understand it being stronger and constructed. Ancestral Divination, they have reverted this buff, which makes sense because if you think about it, this is 1 mana draw card with for a spell, which is very good for spell high decks. You've got Blood Rage Mask, you want this in your deck even if you have no minions. And if you do have minions, it's even better. I feel like, again, this is a card that's... This card, it kind of only does broken things anyway, right? Because of it's 1 mana, draw a bunch of cards, if you enable it. But it's 2-draw, so like, using this fairly is pointless, right? Like, playing this and drawing like 2 or 3 cards in a turn is not really worth it when you can just pass the turn and draw 2 or 3 cards. So, I mean 2 specifically, but you know what I mean, right? Like your hand is going to fill up enough to the point where the 3 cards would often be the same anyway. But if you're playing this to like absolutely motor through your deck by deliberately jamming cheap minions, or playing it as 1 mana draw card for its more broken utility, that's like not what the card is supposed to do, but that's, I think, the only situation where it's good. So I can see why they reverted this change. But I can also see why they wanted to buff it up. Chakri Avatar hit a nerf. This card has felt very, very strong in 2-draw, even in Gauntlet. I was surprised by how good it is. In Duelyst 1, it was trash before they made Shidai, and you could reliably trigger Arcanists in Gauntlet. In 2-draw, you can jam a bunch of cheap spells, and I think the way the weighting works also gives you more of them. That's probably it's probably a bigger thing. Like, you don't typically have 2 juxtapositions in your deck in Duelyst 1 Gauntlet, but in Duelyst 2, you'll get them. So that makes Chakri Avatar very strong. So I can also see, in Constructed, where you can ram a bunch of Mana Vortexes and this and stuff in your deck, Chakri quickly gets out of hand. Vanar, Mark of Solitude makes a 6/6. That seems kind of reasonable because this card used to be a powerhouse in Duelyst 1. I remember like putting this on a Jax token was pretty good. I think the nerf to Jaxi was quite big for this card. I don't remember if they nerfed a couple of other... I think Veil Hunter's the same, but like Fire Spitter's pretty bad now. I guess Widowmaker's kind of better. But Widowmaker doesn't really need... I mean, it's the wrong faction anyway. I swear there used to be another 3 mana neutral ranged unit, but maybe I'm making stuff up. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I think I like this change because this card has been underwhelming compared to what I expected it to be in Gauntlet. And I can only assume it was the same in Constructed. Glacial Elemental goes up to being a 3/3. I think that's fine. As they say in the comments, the nerf is huge when it got Infiltrate on its ability. You couldn't just hide it in the back. It is funny to me that Glacial Elemental ended up being broken in the first place, but like having played with it in Gauntlet, it was very good. And I did a Constructed deck that had this and Voice of the Wind and a bunch of chaff, and it was surprisingly strong, so I can see it. Golem Vanguard becoming a 3/4. yes please. This card has been garbage forever, and it's nice to have it being less garbage. 3 mana 3/4 provoke is also just like kind of an interesting thing to have in the game from a Gauntlet perspective. Sandburrow is a 3/3. This card seems very strong now, I think. Especially if you can heal it at all, so you can attack for 3 and then heal it back up so it can't be counterattacked. Primus Shieldmaster is a 2/6. Thank you. This card was garbage. I mean, I think it's still bad. Like 2/6 is so much worse than 3/6, and the second ability is not that impactful in my experience, but it's nice for it to get something. Ash Method, now you get to place the copies. I think this is a cool change. I don't know that this card still does very much. There's not a lot of synergy with it in the game, but I think this gives it some utility that it didn't have before. Like, if you end up with this in your deck in Gauntlet, you can probably do some interesting things with it. That's it for this balance patch, so let's go to the Wave 2 cards. These are coming out tomorrow, I guess. Or today? Today at 2... Oh, they might be out already, actually. So, we have Capricious Marauder, completely different from its old thing. 3 mana 4/3. After this attacks an enemy, destroy enemy minions diagonal from that enemy. It's not clear to me whether this is, like, immediately diagonally adjacent or in any distance, and whether it's just like behind them diagonally or in any X shape. In either way, this is a really interesting design because it, in theory, changes how your opponent plays. Like, you can't do the standard body block anymore of like move back 2 and then place diagonally, because if this can attack face and kill the thing you just played. But also, it has no immediate board impact. It's a 3 mana 4/3 with no protection. You can just kill it. But if you don't kill it, then the impact it has on your play and the upside of it is very high. I feel like Duelyst already has quite a lot of Feast or Famine cards. I would argue, in fact, that every minion in Duelyst that doesn't have like some kind of strong opening gambit or rush is pretty much like this, where if you stick them, the reward is huge because you can make efficient trades, or your opponent has to like position around the fact that it can make efficient trades. If your opponent has minions on board that can trade into it or has removal, then it dies and that's the end of the story. I think this card being kind of squishy and small, but also extremely efficiently costed for how high the ceiling on it technically is, especially if you have any sort of movement abilities or like a way of locking your opponent in place, like you have a provoke or something. I feel like the one time that you can't kill this is going to be so feel bad. Even if you can just position around it, like sometimes that's going to be impractical, or you have to place your next minion in a space to be attacked by whatever else they have in play. But I think that's going to happen very rarely. If this card had 3 attack, so you could inner focus it, it would be a hideous, hideous thing, so I'm glad they didn't do that. But I can't really see it going in a lot of decks in its current form. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I would probably draft it in Gauntlet to try it, because in Gauntlet things don't always immediately die. Like if you play on turn 1, that's pretty good because it makes it harder for your opponent to position cleanly when they take the center on turn 2. But I think after turn 1, you play it behind you and hope that it makes it harder for them to pressure you, I guess. Or you combo it with movement abilities. It's not that difficult to play around, but I think it is still reasonably costly to do that. Like, the solution is kind of obvious, right? Just don't put your stuff diagonal from each other. But then that actually has that applies a reasonable limitation on your play. So I think, I don't know. Gut feeling is that it will die when you play it most of the time. And therefore, it's not really, like, worth it as a card. But also it's a very hard card to buff, because if it's not reliably dying when you play it, then it has a pretty hideous impact on the game. We'll see. Might be good with Vindicator, actually. I don't know if we'll see people doing that in Constructed, but it's a possibility. Isby's Monument, 3 mana 0/12 structure. At the end of the turn, deal 2 damage to this and heal both generals for 2. So that double triggers your Sunriser, right? You play this wherever. It's going to have 10 HP. You play Sunriser the next turn, pass, it deals 4 damage in an AoE. So there's a way to do Mechanical Warbeast in Lionar. It also triggers, if you curve Light Chaser into this, that's pretty good, right? Because it'll get, if your opponent's taken damage. Wait, can you overheal these days? I can't remember. I think you can, right? So regardless of whether your opponent's taking damage, it should still trigger on them. And you can always hit them with your general to make that start to fire up. Yeah. You know, earlier on when I looked at this card, I was like, oh, this doesn't do very much. But actually, it's an end of turn heal trigger, which was the thing that put Heal Lionar on the map in Duelyst 1, right? When they made the healing tiles. Because now you weren't constantly trying to like save up a bunch of cards, get to like 8 mana and trigger your Sunriser twice. Ooh. Now you can curve this into it, and that's pretty good. The fact that like it's quite hard to remove means that it's probably going to be, if your opponent wants to remove it out of respect for the Sunriser, they have to put a lot of effort into that. So I think actually in that niche this card is quite strong. It's a structure, so it can't attack, so you can't like Divine Bond it. That would be funny. But you can play it in the middle of the board to take up space for a couple turns if you need to. Because if you play it on turn 1 or 2, your opponent's ability to attack it is going to be kind of limited, and it should live a little bit longer. Yeah, card seems kind of, I mean, strong. It's not generically strong, but it's it's a hell of a heal enabler. Like the games where if you play a mirror match and one player has this, the other player doesn't, like the game is completely different for both those players. So yeah, I think this card will see play in that. Is it playable in Gauntlet? Maybe. If I already had like a couple of heal trigger cards and I saw this come up, I'd probably try it. I think the upside of like this into Sunriser is massive. You know, build your own Flash Mechantor. But I don't know if that's like, that's all it does, right? It buffs your Light Chaser, it buffs your Sunriser. I guess you can just replace it otherwise. But I have found that like niche cards that aren't super cheap in 2-draw do have, even though it's 2-draw and there's a replace, they still, if you have too many of them, or even a couple, and you draw them a couple of times, they do clog up your hand quite a bit. So I'll go with a solid maybe. But I think this card is priced to move in heal decks in Constructed. Deck Apotheosis. 4 mana 0/8 Veil. After this takes damage, summon an exact copy of it nearby. Okay. I hate this card. So I think there's been an effort to do something pretty cool here, but I think I have an issue with it, which is that this card is almost unanswerable. So Veil it can't be targeted by spells, I think, or maybe just anything during your opponent's turn, right? I forget whether it dies to Night Sorrow Assassin or whatever. Oh wait, Night Sorrow Assassin got reverted? I forget what they changed that card to. Anyway, maybe it dies to minion effects. Not sure. Spells-wise, there's very little that kills this. The thing is that because it triggers when your opponent hits it as well, you can just, if you're going first, you can jam this on turn 2 in your opponent's face and they can't actually do anything about it most of the time. Cards that kill this are like Plasma Storm if you haven't buffed it much yet, because that's the plan, right? The plan is you play this and then you buff it and then you copy the buffed minion and snowball the board. It dies to Plasma Storm if you haven't buffed it much. It dies to Entropic Decay if you haven't copied it yet. And it dies to Dispels, again, if you haven't copied it yet, right? Ephemeral Shroud or Lightbender if you haven't copied it much. Or had a chance to spread them out. So if your opponent immediately plays one of those like 4 specific cards, and maybe there's 1 or 2 more that I don't know about off the top of my head. Like Repulsor Beast buys a little time, right? Against some factions. If your opponent plays one of those exact cards immediately, then you trade 1 for 1, go down a little bit on mana, which, you know, is often bad. And that's it. If your opponent doesn't have one of those specific cards, and you have any amount of enablement in hand, they probably just lose. Like, there aren't really a lot of ways to come back from this. I'm not sure there's any... There's like Decimate, right? It's like the only full board hitting mass removal effect in the game now, because of Plasma Storm being changed. There's no Frostburn yet. Oh, there's Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis kills it. Technically, if you can get to all the 1/1s. Or have Spirit Harvester in play. But if you have Spirit Harvester in play, you probably played it the previous turn, whereupon it doubled your opponent's crabs. So, bold. I think this card is quite strong. I think it's very strong. The deck with it is probably very fun. The most obvious place for me to play it would be Magmar, because you have a bunch of ways to damage it immediately that also happen to make it cheaper. So you're reducing your commitment of mana by playing it out. So you've got your Kujata, your Flash Reincarnation. Kinetic Equilibrium buffs it. I don't think it hits it anymore, right? But it buffs it. You've got your Grid of Fortitude, Primordial Gazer to buff it as well, and then things like Primus Fist. So you've got a lot of ways to make it larger, and a lot of ways to damage it without even having to pass the turn and rely on your opponent to do it for you. So that's pretty scary. Honestly, that's pretty scary. Oh, and Spirit Harvester as well. You play that, right? I guess the dream is you play your Spirit Harvester, and then next turn you play this and buff it, and then the Spirit Harvester triggers and makes more of them. Pretty strong. And I think that's going to be fun to do, but I worry about it because there's like almost no way back for the opponent in the game right now. There's like no answer to this card besides a couple of specific spells, and I don't think there's anything that really answers it once it's going. Which I think that would be okay if it was harder to do, but because it's so trivially easy to set up, like, again, you can just jam it in their face a lot of the time, and it will not die. Like, if you're, let's say, I mean, it's Gauntlet, or your opponent's had, like, you know, normal constructed, you went first, you played a 2-drop, turn 2 you play this, your opponent's got like a 2-4 or a 3-4 or something in play, and they're general. What are they going to do about it? They have, I mean, even if their creature can reach it, if they attack it with, you know, with their minion, right, you get 2 0/5s. If they attack one of them with their general, it splits again. You untap, now you can buff one of them, possibly multiple of them if you've got some AoE buff spell, and you're off to the races, really. I guess once they become damaged enough, so they might die to a couple more AoE effects, but there aren't a lot of like big damage AoEs in the game right now. Like Mechanical Warbeast is not too difficult for them to play around. And especially if you can heal them as well, or buff their toughness in any way, like with Inner Oasis, for instance, that also makes them very scary. So I think this card is going to be difficult to deal with, and I think that the decks, if this catches on in Constructed, which I think it probably will, because people will, I think if it's not that good, people will play it for fun, and then if it is that good, people will just play it, you know, as a value card. Let me just get this music going again. I think in Gauntlet, card is, if you have a pump spell, it's going to snowball very hard because the answers to it are so specific, and playing it early is so safe. I think maybe eventually it would run out of steam. Right, you probably can't like put together multiple buff spells and healing and, you know, positional things to get it into good attacks or whatever. In Constructed, you'll be able to do that, and a lot of those cards are cards you want in your deck anyway. Right? Flash, Kujata, Healing Mystic, Primordial Gazer, Greater Fortitude. I mean, I would just put those in any Magmar deck in this in 2-draw, I think. So I don't think it's too difficult to get it to pop off, even with cards that you just have anyway. And then it's very difficult for the opponent to undo that. And that's the bit that concerns me the most. Like, it's one of those things where it's easy to enable, safe to play most of the time, and then also the payoff is quite powerful, and there's no way out for your opponent, or very few ways out for your opponent once you've started to go off with it. So while it looks like jank, this card has very few weaknesses, and I would prefer it to be changed. I think it might be more fun if it only triggered if it took damage on your turn. That way it's more effort. You can't just like slam it in the middle of the board and let your opponent attack it futilely. I think you get a lot more benefit out of, from a gameplay perspective, like having to set it up a bit more, having to play Magnetize or Demonic Lure or something, Mist Dragon Seal first before you can start attacking with it, or at least like giving your opponent the option to make you spend that time by forcing you to play it in a safer position. I think that would be helpful, and I wouldn't mind if it was, if it was like a 3-mana 0/6 or 0/7 with that ability. That could probably work. But yeah, I don't know if this card will be as impactful as I suspect, but this sort of design that is like, yeah, it's a fun synergy card, but actually it has very few answers, kind of worries me a little bit. Right, on to the next thing. Crazed. 4-mana 5/5. This has Veil and Frenzy if you have 9 or more mana crystals. I like this card. I don't think it's... There's nothing that really drives me to put this in a deck, Even once it's online, you play it and your opponent can still trade into it with minions. And before that, it's just a body. It is a pretty hard-hitting body. It trades into stuff reasonably well. So, like, it's not embarrassing, right? I think it's worse than Hailstone Golem. Even with the upside, probably, honestly. But not, like, much worse. It's just sort of an equivalent. I think it's fine. In Constructed, though, I don't really see this drawing a lot of eyes. I don't really know... Like, it's a good Rattlesnake play once the game goes very late, right? You put it behind you and your opponent can't really come in because they'll get hit by the Frenzy. And it's harder for them to kill because of Veil. So maybe it does have utility on that basis, but that only works if you're like... If they're not pressuring you enough that their minions are just going to be in position to kill it anyway. And if you're on an even board state and you have a bit of tempo advantage, at 9 mana, there are so many more things you can be doing that will probably have a higher impact on the game than playing this sort of moderately threatening 4-drop. That said, I like the card. I think it's cool. I like the design space, right? And we might see other effects later, like a 2-drop that has +1/+1 if you have, I don't know, 6 or more mana crystals, for instance. That could be cool. Boulder Breacher, it's back. 6 mana 7/7 Golem. Opening Gambit. Deal 3 damage to other allied golems and all units nearby them. I think this design is super cool. I'm not sure this card does anything. 6-drop 7/7 with no abilities by itself is not a good fallback case. Golems are like somewhat sticky, but mostly expensive. I don't think the golems are very exciting in 2-drop because they fill up your hand too much. Playing this with a Metallurgist to get a 3 damage AoE might be one of its better cases, but your Metallurgist dies in the process, so you'd better be getting pretty good payoff out of it. The card this reminds me the most of is like First Sword of a Crane. The 6 mana 7/7 common gives all your minions +1/+0. I think now it gives your characters +1/+0, so it works on your general too, which makes it a bit better. But that card is so underwhelming. Like, I often felt that it's actually worse than Storm Metal Golem, 6 mana 8/8 vanilla. Because at least Storm Metal Golem, A, has a relevant creature type, and B, well, it's big. And that sometimes makes a difference to whether or not it dies or how, what it can do. So I suspect that this card is not particularly great. That said, there will be games where if you pick one of these early and want to try and draft around it, or you've already got a couple of random golems. Now that golem, now that the tall one, Golem Protector, I've forgotten its name already. Now that the provoke one is a 3/4 instead, that card is no longer embarrassing to just pick. And Metallurgist is always fine, right? So if you're drafting and you have a couple of Metallurgists and maybe the provoke thing and like a Hailstone Golem already, and you see one of these, you know what? Sure. Especially as like being able to make it a 5-mana 7/7 with Metallurgist makes it a bit less embarrassing. Although again, it will kill your Metallurgist in the process. So you better hope that you're getting some decent value out of that. If it dealt less damage to your golems, even if it was 2 instead of 3, so it didn't kill Metallurgist, this card would be so much better, I think. But the high cost of playing it, and the fact that you need so much upside and the body isn't that exciting, means that I think this card is mostly going to be relegated to the bench. Nebula, 7-mana 4/7 airdrop. This has rush if you control another golem. It's kind of a scary card to put in the game in one sense. Like, given that there's a golem that can make it cheaper, 6-mana 4/7 airdrop rush. That's pretty exciting, right? I think this is similar to Metal Tooth, except that it's much harder to do out of hand. And I actually don't think that like a 4/7 rush is probably worse than a 2/2 Frenzy rush in a lot of cases, because obviously the fact that it, you know, if you had a 3-mana 4/7 rush, it would be better. But like a 2/2 Frenzy with a pump spell is so much stronger than a 4/7, even if it costs more cards. Because the fact that it costs more cards is kind of irrelevant because this is 2-draw. So you would probably rather have the one that's easier to dump your hand with. The fact that mechs are cheaper also benefits Metal Tooth quite a lot. So I think this card is fine. I think in Gauntlet you need a lot of golems for it to be worth considering. Like more than the Boulder Breacher even. Because at least this card is like, if you play this with no value, it's still bad, but it's not a million miles off Storm Metal, and that card has always been secretly like just okay and fine in Gauntlet. If you play this for no value, that's catastrophic. 7-mana 4/7, no text. I mean, even with airdrop, it's like, you know, airdrop has to matter. I think airdrop is one of those weird keywords where when it's good, it's incredibly good, and airdrop rush is pretty strong. Airdrop no rush is like, well, I mean, I can put it behind them, but that doesn't achieve anything, right? It's like the Ironcliff Guardian is good because provoke with airdrop is such an incredible synergy, because you can put it in such a place that it traps the thing you most want to trap and makes it harder for your opponent to punish, because you can, you know, use your opponent's own minions to body block their attacks and stuff much more easily. But if you just had a 3/10 airdrop, it would be like, okay. Wouldn't really do anything. So I think that if you can reliably enable this card in Gauntlet, I think it's good. If you can reliably enable this card in Constructed, I think it's still okay. I might be wrong. It's a bit weird to be like, oh, a large haste minion, that's bad. Like, everyone knows, you know. Actually, I think the best comparison, I was going to bring up Spectral Revenant, but the best comparison is Sabertooth Alpha from Duelyst 1, which was a 7-mana 5/5 rush. That card always had rush, hit for more damage. It was a common. So you could play it a lot, and it was okay. And this was in one draw where 7 drops were better and card advantage plays were better. It was okay. I'm not sure it saw much constructed play. I think I remember there being a deck that was like an Abyssian deck with 3 Revenants and 3 Saberspine Alphas, but I might be making that up. I must be making that up. Why would you do that? But it was in Gauntlet, it was like fine. Not super exciting. Like, you wouldn't necessarily pick it over Storm Metal Golem, especially if you already had another 7-drop. So I think Nebula's in a similar space, except that it also requires enablement. So there's going to be lots of times where you see the card and you're like, I can't pick this, I have no golems. Interesting. Like, it's an interesting way of making a rush minion. because neutral rush minions are dangerous, and the Saberspine Alpha was like pretty weak, right? I think this card is similar. I think it's fine, you know. World Core Golem, 9 mana, 12/12. This card costs 1 less for each enemy minion and 1 more for each allied minion. I love this design. I'm always games like this and Hearthstone where minions can attack. The kind of correct solution to like every board is, well, I should kill all this stuff, right? And it does mean that you need to build your deck in a very specific way in order to play from behind at all. Like a lot of Hearthstone is worse for this than Duelyst because of Duelyst's positional aspect. Like in Duelyst, you can outplay your opponent a little bit in order to get ahead again. Whereas in Hearthstone, you don't even have that option a lot of the time. But random vanilla minions often do absolutely nothing when you're behind, because your opponent will just trade into them in whatever way they think is most efficient and then develop more stuff, and you're back to where you started. And I think it is good for these type of games to have cards that are only good when you're behind, or better when you're behind. So a lot of removal doesn't count for that, because especially point removal, but even AoE as well. If your opponent deploys, if you're ahead and your opponent deploys a thing and you kill it, you've reset the game state, except you've got more stuff. So you're still threatening, you're still forcing them to answer your existing on-board things with whatever mana and card they play. So it's harder for them to deploy stuff. With AoE, if your opponent deploys multiple things or spreads out their stuff, and you've already got a board, you wipe their board, you're in, right? So AoEs are like a bit better defensively, but also the AoEs in Duelyst 2 are kind of quite toned down. It's not like Magic where there's 4 mana destroy everything. In Duelyst and Hearthstone as well, you know, you're restricted to much worse board clear effects because they're also so good when you're ahead. And being ahead shouldn't be completely punishable, I guess. So cards like this that are explicitly designed to be played when you're behind are nice to see. That said, this one, I don't think does very much. If you get this down to like 6 mana, congratulations, your Storm Metal Golem is slightly bigger, but it still dies to the same things. There is a dream of playing this with Spirit of the Wild. I think I had a lot of fun playing Blood Torah Spirit of the Wild. Deck wasn't good, but it was fun. And when it worked, Spirit is only 4 mana in this game, so getting this down to 5 isn't completely infeasible. But mostly it's just a big idiot. If this had Provoke, for instance, then it would be better at fulfilling. It would still die to removal, but it would be better at fulfilling its position. Better at fulfilling its role as like, this card is better at protecting you when you're behind, and worse at finishing the game when you're ahead. Unlike almost every other card in the game. But as it is, it's a large, expensive vanilla minion that can still be displaced, can still be worked around, can't protect you very easily outside of just, you know, being good at body blocking, and still dies to removal or movement effects or whatever. Doesn't protect your general from burst. So as it is, I think this card is going to struggle to hit its goal of being like, this helps you play from behind. What you really want is like a 4 mana 3/5 Provoke with the same ability. That card would work. That card would sing. World Core Golem ain't it. Is that it? There's the the unbuff to Ancestral Divination. Some nice skins. I like that they're changing the textures now with this shroom effect. It's very cool. We done? I think there was something else I was going to talk about, but I've forgotten off the top of my head what it was. No, I think we're done. So like I said at the beginning, I'm probably going to wait until Wave 3 to really dive back in. I don't think very many of these cards are going to change the experience of playing Gauntlet, at least. Except this, like losing to this will be miserable. But it's also a little hard to do, and it's an epic. I don't know what the weighting on it will be, but broadly speaking, like I guess this is priced to move, right? This will sometimes be annoying because you don't have an answer to it. This likewise. But I think that the fundamental problem of Gauntlet and Duelyst 2 is that this is music up really loud. That's fine. The fundamental issue, I think, is that your cards, the decks are kind of prescribed by the weighting system, and there aren't enough cards in the game really to explore very much. I think from what I hear, the constructed portion of the game has similar issues. It's just like the decks are similar, too similar. But in Gauntlet, I think there is an opportunity to do something else. Like they probably could change the weighting system and just, even if all they did was scale down how synergistic the decks are, so that you're relying more on random commons, on playing, core mechanic Duelyst, getting positioning right, using a removal right. I kind of miss that. I don't know how well that works in 2-draw, to be perfectly honest, but the general sort of core gameplay of Duelyst with the positioning is so skill intensive that like one of the things I liked most about Gauntlet back in the day was that challenge of like, okay, we're not playing constructed decks. Yeah, people will sometimes have a legendary or some other good play or whatever, the nuts decks, but like most of the time, this is Hailstone Golem versus Hailstone Golem, baby, right? And how do you get the best out of non-synergistic cards with not that many words on? You position right. And it really focuses your attention on positioning in a way that you don't get in other ways of play. And Gauntlet and Duelyst 2 doesn't really do that because all the Songhai decks have 3 Tusk Wars. And the Lionheart decks, every Lionheart deck I've played has just been this like glacial control deck that wanted to drag the game out for like 20 turns. I don't have to try and do that with Hailstone Golem. The game is going to feed me Phoenix Fires and Lantern Foxes and Ironcliff Guardians and Divine Bonds and whatever. So I would like to see that weight system be scaled back such that it wasn't just giving you like the highlights of every faction, but instead actually encouraged you to play this stuff, normal cards that are kind of in a lot of situations, right? This is what I want. I want to see this card do work. It's not going to, I think, in a lot of cases, but like in Duelyst 1 Gauntlet, this card would be kind of a house, I think. So slightly worse Hailstone Golem that's also a great top deck in the late game. Duelyst 2, well, they'll be dead by then to my Phoenix Fire Spiral technique. And also there's no top decking because it's 2-draw. So, I don't know. I realize I rag on 2-draw quite a lot. Like, I expected it to not really work out in the game's favor. And in my opinion, that expectation has been met. And I am a person who, I love a Howling Mine. I've talked about this before in a different video, but like, I love a Howling Mine, but a lot of these cards are just held back by 2-draw. This would be good in 1-draw, especially in Gauntlet. This is much worse because of 2-draw, because you can play all the cheap pump spells you need to get it online. And because like getting punished, if they do have the answer to it, you're not like that far behind because you've got lots of cards in hand. This is good. This card is good. Regardless, this will be better in 1-draw as well, because even though you're less likely to have more golems, you're also, the ability is a bit more impactful, I think, and playing it as a vanilla creature is less bad. This will be better in 1-draw because expensive card advantage plays are better in 1-draw. Same with this, like, and so on. I think Duelyst is already hard to design meaningful and impactful cards for, and I think we've seen a lot of really interesting ideas in these designs, and the same with the Duelyst.gg cards, which maybe I should do a set review of them as well. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in the designs. I don't know how many of them will actually make a meaningful positive change to how the game plays out. Like, I don't think any of these cards make the game more fun. Maybe this, if you can make it work. This makes Heal Lionheart better, but they've already, I mean, they recently nerfed it, so is that going to be good for the game? Who knows? Yeah, I think the 2-draw was a big shot to the foot, and I still think that. Like, I thought that initially, and I think that now. But, you know, I'm still open to the idea that they might pull something out of the box, but I think for Duelyst to really work, you need to find a solution to how tempo-based it is, how board-based it is, and how consistent it is. And I think 2-draw makes all of those issues worse. Yeah. Right, I'm going to wrap this up. We've just shy of the hour mark. It's good length. Thank you all for watching. And, I guess, in terms of other videos, like I said, I'm going to wait for Wave 3 before I jump into trying to draft more Gauntlet. Or if they make a change to the weights that makes the format more varied, I'll check that out for sure. I am still playing Street Fighter, but those videos haven't gotten much interest after the first couple. And I'm not sure I have anything to show. I recently bought a fight stick, which is great. Now I have to relearn all the controls again. So if I made a video now, it would just be me failing to throw fireballs. If people want to do... My Mecha Bellum video got like 1,000 views, but it was people... I guess it showed up in people's feeds, and it was people clicking on it and being like, oh wait, this guy's just doing the tutorial and leaving. Because most of them watched it for like 20 seconds or something. But if people are interested in watching Mecha Bellum, I can do some more videos of that. I've done a little bit of laddering with the game, and it is very fun. Quite challenging, so that could be interesting. I will probably... I've been playing a couple of new games recently that I might do videos on, but I only recently finished Marvel's Midnight Suns, so mostly I've just been playing that until, like, I think a week ago I wrapped it up. So yeah, I'll make videos when I have the time, inclination, and also something worth making a video of that I enjoy and think people will actually watch. But I think in the meantime, it's the channel's still there, and hopefully people will just see videos when they come out. So I'm not going to pressure myself to upload a schedule, especially if I'm just making videos that no one's really interested in. So in that case, I'll see you when I see you. Thank you, folks. Have a good evening.